Everyone overlooked the Japanese billionaire until the waitress greeted him in fluent Japanese that night. The city of Greyhaven, New Jersey, was a creature of concrete and cold Atlantic wind on its most polished street. The restaurant loom glittered like a gold tooth in a shadowed mouth. It was just past 9 o'clock, the dead hour between the dinner rush and the late-night cocktail crowd. The air inside was thick with the scent of expensive truffle oil, sharp gin, and the cold, mineral smell of ice. Into this golden-lit quiet stepped an older Japanese man. He was small, almost lost inside a faded, beige trench coat that had seen too many seasons. His hair was a neat silver, but his shoes were scuffed and worn at the heels. He stood by the reservation lectern, waiting. The hostess, adjusting her black dress, glanced up, saw him and looked straight through him, turning her attention to polishing a wine glass. A busboy nearly clipped him, rushing past with a clattering tray, offering no apology. The man simply stepped back, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of deference that went entirely unnoticed. The manager, a tall man with slicked-back hair, emerged from the back. His eyes did a swift, brutal calculation faded coat, old shoes, solitary diner. He offered a tight, dismissive smile that did not reach his eyes and turned away to greet a wealthier-looking couple stepping in from the cold. From across the dining room, Nora Calloway watched. Nora worked the night shift. She worked every shift she could get, her life a relentless cycle of balancing trays and counting tips, all of it funneled into the black hole of her mother's hospital bills. Her feet ached, a dull throb that had become her constant companion. She saw the man waiting, his patience a tangible thing in the restless room. She saw him bow again, this time to a waitress who hurried past, annoyed. Something stirred in Nora's memory, a dusty corner of her mind from her college days, a class she had taken purely for the credits, taught by a stern professor who demanded perfection, Japanese 101. The man looked tired, but his posture was impeccable. He was invisible to everyone else, but to Nora, he was suddenly the only person in the room. She picked up a small water carafe, her movements fluid from years of practice, and walked over. The manager shot her a look. "Why are you bothering?" But Nora ignored it. She stopped in front of the man. He looked up, his eyes dark and calm, expecting to be told to leave. Nora smiled, a small, genuine expression that felt rusty on her face. She gave a slight, respectful bow from the shoulders, just as her professor had taught her. "Konbanwa," she said, her voice low and clear. The pronunciation felt strange, but correct. "Ocha wa ikaga desu ka?" Her Japanese, rusty but precise, cut through the ambient noise of clinking glasses. The bartender paused, his shaker halfway to the glass. The manager's head snapped around. The old man's stillness broke. A light, sudden and warm, ignited in his eyes. He straightened slightly, a look of profound surprise softening the lines on his face. He responded in a low, smooth baritone that held a surprising resonance. "Hi. Onegai shimasu. Arigatou. Yes, please. Thank you." He looked at her, truly seeing her. "Anata wa watashi ni kizuita. You noticed me." "My name is Kaito Mizuhara," he said, switching to lightly accented English, as if granting her a courtesy. "Nora Calloway," she replied, pouring him a glass of water. "The hot tea will just be a moment. Mr. Mizuhara, would you like to sit at the bar, or perhaps a small table? The bar will be fine." As Nora turned to retrieve a cup for the lotus tea, the heavy glass doors of Loom swung open with a blast of cold air, bringing the sound of loud laughter and wet pavement. 6 men, all wearing expensive, sharp-cut suits over bodies that spoke of gym time and violence, filled the entryway. Tattoos snaked up from their collars and onto their necks. They were the Valenti Circle. They did not wait to be seated. "Matteo, the corner booth is open," one shouted, clapping another on the back. They moved with the entitled swagger of men who owned every room they entered, ignoring the hostess, pushing past a waiter. Nora felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. The Valenti crew meant trouble. They were loud, demanding, terrible tippers, and they treated the staff with open contempt. She quickly prepared the tea, her hands steady, and brought it to Kaito at the bar. He had settled onto the stool, his back straight, observing the room. The Valenti men took the largest booth, their voices echoing. Nora instinctively angled her body as she set the tea down, creating a small, temporary screen between the old man and the loud men in the booth. "Your Japanese is very good," Kaito said quietly, cupping his hands around the warm ceramic. "Just a few classes in college," Nora demurred, pulling out her order pad. "Can I get you anything else? Some food?" "Thank you." He looked at her, his gaze assessing. "You are new to Greyhaven." "Born and raised," Nora said with a wry smile. "Just stuck here mostly." She took his simple order for miso soup and a small salad, her pen flying across the pad. She was aware of the Valenti crew watching her, their eyes raking over her as she moved. She ignored them, focusing on the quiet dignity of the man in front of her. Kaito Mizuhara watched the room, his eyes missing nothing. He sipped his tea. Nora went to put in his order, her mind already calculating the tip she would lose from the Valenti table. She did not see the man in the darkest corner of the bar, nursing a single club soda for over an hour. He was dressed in a rumpled suit, his face forgettable. He had been tracking the Valenti circle. But now, his focus had shifted. He pulled a small, worn notebook from his jacket pocket. Under the dim light, the agent from the Federal Organized Crime Bureau scrawled a hasty note. He circled the name Nora had just said aloud. "Mizuhara, Japanese national, alone, interacting with a waitress. Why is he here?" He paused, then added foreign target. Nora Calloway returned to the bar, wiping down the clean marble, blissfully unaware. She did not know that her simple act of kindness, of seeing a man everyone else had overlooked, had not just earned her a customer. She had just stepped into the invisible crossfire between two empires, marked herself as a person of interest, and tied her fate to a man whose gratitude was more dangerous than any insult. The greeting had been a key, and she had just turned it, unlocking a door she never knew existed. Kaito Mizuhara ate his miso soup with a quiet, deliberate economy of motion. He lifted the bowl to drink the broth, then used his chopsticks to pick up the small cubes of tofu, each piece lifted and consumed as if he were measuring the passage of time. He was not eating. He was performing a ritual of sustenance. Nora found herself watching his hands. They were clean, the nails perfectly kept, but they were not the soft hands of a man who had only ever counted money. They were strong, with defined knuckles. As he set his chopsticks down on the ceramic rest, she saw a thin, white scar that ran across the back of his right hand, disappearing under his cuff. It was too straight for an accident, too fine. It looked less like the mark of a kitchen knife and more like the signature of a dagger. He caught her looking, but his expression did not change. He spoke, his voice still low, pulling her attention away from the scar. "I was an engineer," he said, as if sensing her unspoken question about his life. "A long time ago. I built ships in Yokohama." "Yokohama," Nora repeated, testing the word. It brought a flash of another memory from that same college class, a guest lecture on modern Japanese society. The professor had mentioned the sprawling port, the trade, and, in a hushed tone, the organizations that truly controlled the docks. He had whispered a name, the Shirakawa Kai, a powerful, shadowy entity that blurred the line between business and something much older. "I know the name," she said carefully. "It is a place of industry," Kaito said, his gaze distant. "I found I was better at moving ships than building them. Logistics. It is a very simple business, really. You just move things from one point to another." He brushed past the name, the city, and the implications as if they were nothing, a gust of wind she had merely imagined. He was a billionaire in logistics, he explained, and nothing more. Nora refilled his tea. The restaurant was louder now. The Valenti crew was getting drunk, their laughter like shattering glass. One of them, a thick-necked man with a shiny watch, whistled as Nora passed their table. "Hey, sweetheart, over here, more bread, and bring a smile this time." Nora's spine went rigid, but her face remained a smooth, professional mask. "Right away, sir." She turned, her cheeks burning with a quiet, familiar shame. As she walked back to the bar, she felt Kaito's gaze on her. It was not pitying or invasive, it was solid. He watched her, and in his watching, the Valenti crew's jeers seemed to fade, as if his quiet presence erected an invisible, soundproof screen around her. She retrieved the tea, her movements precise. When she set the small pot on the bar, her fingers brushed the cool, dark marble next to his hand, a simple, fleeting touch. Kaito Mizuhara bowed his head, a full, measured gesture of gratitude, not just for the tea, but for the service, for the dignity she afforded him. In a world that rushed and shoved, this simple, profound respect felt like an anchor. Nora felt an unfamiliar softening in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the hot kitchen. It was then that the front door rattled, though no one had entered. A piece of white paper, folded once, slid across the polished floor, coming to rest near the hostess stand. Nora saw it first, then the manager. It was a standard business envelope. But something was wrong. A dark, wet stain was visible even from across the room. The manager walked over, his stride tight, he bent down, picked it up, and his face, usually ruddy, turned the color of chalk. He looked at the hostess, his eyes wide with panic. "Did you see who left this?" She shook her head, terrified. He hurried into the back office, the envelope in his hand. Nora, clearing plates from a nearby table, followed him with her eyes. The door swung shut, but not before she saw him unfold the paper. It was a childlike drawing of a broken window, rendered in thick, crimson-red ink. Below it, a message was scrawled, "Loom pays its protection, 1 week." The manager looked up and saw Nora watching. He waved her away, his hand trembling. "It is nothing, Nora, a prank. Go back to your tables. Just ignore it." Nora's grip tightened on the heavy silver tray she was holding. She could feel the metal edges digging into her palms, her knuckles turning white. Ignore it. That was the mantra of Greyhaven. Ignore the corruption, ignore the fear, ignore the men who treated the world like their personal property. She turned and walked back to the bar, her composure flawless. Kaito was watching her, his expression unreadable. He had seen the envelope. He had seen the manager's fear. He knew, perhaps better than she did, what it meant. He finished his meager meal and signaled for the check. As Nora printed the slip, he reached into the breast pocket of his faded coat and pulled out a wallet. From it, he extracted a single, stiff card. It was not white, but a deep, matte black, the color of a moonless night. The lettering was embossed in simple, silver kanji, and, below it, stark English. Mizuhara Maritime Holdings. Nora's eyes widened. She'd seen that name before, on the massive cranes down at the port, on the sides of container ships that blocked the horizon. This was not just logistics, this was one of the largest shipping empires on the planet. This man, in his scuffed shoes, could buy and sell this entire city block. She took the card, the texture smooth and heavy, and slipped it into her apron pocket, where it rested against her hip like a small, dense weight. Kaito paid his bill in cash, leaving a tip that was more than her pay for the entire shift. He stood, pulling his coat tight. "Be careful. Nora-san," he said, the honorific startling her. "The wind in this city is cold." He walked to the door and, for a moment, he was just an old man again. He stepped out into the night. In the parking lot across the street, inside a dark blue sedan with no license plates, 2 men sat. They were not FOCB. They were Coastline Intelligence Task Force. They had been tracking the Mizuhara Holdings ships for weeks, suspecting an irregularity in the manifests. They had not expected the CEO himself to appear at a mid-level restaurant. One of them lifted a camera with a long-range lens. The headlights flashed once, twice not a signal, but the bright, intrusive pop of a surveillance flash. Capturing Kaido's face as he looked up the street, the operative lowered the camera. We have him, and he is not alone. Back inside, Nora began clearing Kaido's table. She folded the massive tip into her pocket, her guilt mingling with relief. She saw the small ceramic teacup and the empty soup bowl. It felt incomplete. She grabbed a fresh order slip and a pen. On the blank paper, she carefully wrote out the characters she had practiced so many times in college, the strokes stiff but earnest. Honjitsu wa makoto ni arigatu gozaimashita. It was an honor to serve you. She paused, then added a second line, a simple hope. Mata no okoshio, omachi shite orimasu. I hope you return. She left the note on the bar, weighted down by the teacup, a small, paper gesture sent out into a world she did not understand. She did not know that the man in the car had photographed her through the window, or that the man in the faded coat was already making a call. His voice, now stripped of all pleasantry, crackling with an authority that could move oceans. She just knew she had to get back to work. The quiet of Loom was shattered at 2 a.m. Nora was in the back, tallying receipts, the restaurant empty save for Sal, the old prep chef, who was slowly mopping the kitchen floor. The first sound was a heavy, metallic thunk as a brick hit the reinforced glass of the door. The second was the explosive, cascading crash of the entire front window wall giving way. Shouts and laughter echoed from the street. Down Sal yelled, dropping the mop. He grabbed Nora's arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled her toward the cellar stairs. Now, Nora the cellar. They stumbled down the dark, narrow steps, the smell of dust, cork, and fermenting wine washing over them. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs so hard it hurt. Above them, they heard more shattering glass, the thud of heavy objects overturning tables, and the roar of a motorcycle engine peeling away. Then, silence. Nora and Sal stayed in the dark for a long time, their breath clouding in the cool air. Nora's hands were shaking. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a witness. When they finally crept upstairs, the restaurant was a violation. The golden-lit room was destroyed. Shards of glass covered the floor like sharp, glittering snow. Cold wind whipped through the gaping hole where the window had been, scattering napkins. Nora was staring at the wreckage, numb, when a car, a long black sedan with windows so dark they looked like polished stone, pulled silently to the curb. Kaido Mizuhara stepped out, followed by a younger, formidable-looking man in a perfectly tailored black suit. The new man, Haru Okabe, moved with a silent, coiled grace, his eyes scanning the street, the rooftops, and the shadows, all in one swift, practiced motion. Kaido did not look angry. He looked profoundly sad as he surveyed the damage. He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking rapid, low Japanese. He walked to the ruined entrance, Haru at his side, and looked at Nora. He made a small, short gesture to Haru, a flick of the fingers. It was not a request, it was a command. Haru nodded and began making his own calls. "They will pay for this," Nora whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "Glass can be replaced," Kaido said, his voice calm. He turned to Sal. "Go home, Sal. You are safe." He gestured to Haru, who was already arranging a car for the chef. Within 30 minutes, a new, unmarked van pulled up. Not police, but a 24-hour commercial glass repair crew. They began to board up the front, their movements efficient and quiet. Kaido Mizuhara stood on the sidewalk, his faded trench coat flapping in the wind, and simply watched. He was protecting his investment. He was protecting the place where he had been seen. The next morning, Nora came in early, uncertain if she even had a job. The boards were up, but the sound of hammering came from inside. A new, custom-paneled glass window was already being fitted. A black car, different from the night before, idled at the curb. Matteo Valenti, the man from the booth, stepped out. He was handsome in a brutal way, wearing a tracksuit that probably cost more than Nora's monthly rent. He sipped an espresso from a tiny paper cup. He looked at the new window, then at Nora. He smiled, a flash of white teeth. "Redecorating," he chirped. It looks expensive." Nora's fear was suddenly eclipsed by a cold, sharp anger. She stepped past the workman, standing on the sidewalk, forcing him to look at her. "We are not afraid of you." Mateo's smile widened, his eyes cold. "That is good. Fear is bad for business." "We do not buy peace with fear," Nora said, the words coming out before she could stop them. Mateo laughed, a short, ugly bark. He finished his espresso, crumpled the cup in his fist, and tossed it at her feet. "Brave girl. I like that." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But peace is not what I am selling. Sweetheart, I am selling order. And you are going to pay for it." He tapped the new glass. "Tell your new friend I want to meet him. A negotiation. Tomorrow night, Pier 7, 8 o'clock. If he respects this city, he will be there." He got back in his car and was gone. Across the street, in the same forgettable sedan as the night before, FOCB agent Lark Monroe lowered her binoculars. She had a new team, and they were already at work. While the glass crew was installing the window, an FOCB technician, disguised as a florist, had delivered a large, ostentatious bouquet of lilies, compliments of the landlord, and placed the vase on the bar. The bug inside was top of the line. "Valenti is getting sloppy. Meeting in the open," her partner said. "He is not sloppy," Monroe whispered, her eyes on the restaurant. "He is arrogant." She watched as Kaito Mizuhara's black sedan returned. "The target is the Japanese. Mizuhara, the Valenti crew is just the local problem. Do not touch the Japanese. Understood. He is a diplomatic line we do not cross unless we have to." That evening, after a tense, boarded-up shift, Nora was wiping down the last table. Kaito had been in the back, in the office, for hours. He emerged as she was clocking out. "Allow me to drive you home, Nora-san," he said. It was not a question. She was too tired to argue, too scared to walk the dark streets alone. She nodded. Haru Okabe held the back door of the sedan for her. The inside was silent, insulated from the city's noise. It smelled faintly of leather and roasted barley tea. They drove through the wet streets, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. "Who are you?" Mr. Mizuhara, Nora asked, her voice quiet in the heavy silence. "You are not just a man who moves ships." Kaito stared out the window, his reflection staring back. The streetlights passed over his face, illuminating the lines of exhaustion, the old scar, the profound weariness in his eyes. "I am a man who chose silence for too long," he said, his voice heavy. "I believed that if I built a clean house, the dirt from the world would not get in. I was wrong," he looked at her. "I am a man who owes a debt." "You should call the police," Nora said, the words sounding hollow even to her. Kaito gave a short, sad laugh. "The police Valenti does not run his operations alone. He has partners. He has ears inside the Metropolitan Integrity Commission, the MIC, the Anti-Corruption Bureau, the fox guarding the chicken coop," Kaito said. "They take a share. And in return, they guarantee that official reports get lost, witnesses disappear, and men like Matteo Valenti are never in the wrong place at the wrong time." The car slowed, but they were not at her apartment. Haru pulled onto the old access road for Nightingale Dock. The sedan stopped at a chain-link fence overlooking the dark water. Kaito pointed. A massive container ship, one of his, sat low in the water, fully loaded. It was dark, its engines cold. "That is the Yokohama Star," Kaito said. "It was supposed to sail 4 days ago, but suddenly there was a problem with the permits. A quarantine inspection, a customs delay, a new environmental fee." He tapped the glass. "Valenti's men control the unions that unload the cargo. The MIC controls the inspectors who sign the papers. They are strangling my business. Nora, they are trying to force me to use their services, their protection." He turned to her, the dim dashboard lights casting shadows on his face. He spoke in quiet, precise Japanese. "Anata no shinsetsu ga hyuteki ni naranai you ni. Do not let your kindness become a target." Nora looked at the massive, imprisoned ship, then back at the man who owned it. She felt the weight of the business card in her pocket. She was so far out of her depth she could no longer feel the bottom. But she was not drowning. Not yet. She met his gaze, her own reflection looking back at her from his dark eyes. "Watashi ga anata ni aisatsu shita toki," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Sono toki sude ni hyuteki deshita." "I was already a target when I greeted you." Kaido Mizuhara held her gaze for a long moment. Then, for the first time, he smiled. It was not a sad or weary smile. It was the smile of a man who had just found an ally. The restaurant was closed. The new glass front, installed with silent efficiency hours ago, reflected the empty, wet streets of Greyhaven. The dining room was dark, but the kitchen was alive with a low, humming energy. It was past midnight. Sal, the old chef, had long since gone home, his face drawn with a fear that made him look a decade older. Only Nora and Kaido remained. They stood in the stainless steel heart of the restaurant. The pilot lights on the massive gas range hissed softly. On the wall, the order up sign, usually dark at this hour, was stuck, casting a faint residual red glow that painted the metallic surfaces in shades of shadow and crimson. The industrial ovens, cooling from the night service, still radiated a low, comforting heat, a warmth that pushed back against the cold fear that had settled in the room. Nora was scrubbing her hands for what felt like the 10th time, trying to scour away the feeling of violation, the memory of the shattered glass. She winced, a sharp, sudden intake of breath. "You are hurt." Kaido's voice was quiet, but it cut through the hum of the freezers. Nora looked down. A long, thin scratch ran diagonally up her forearm, beaded with a few bright drops of blood. She must have gotten it when she and Sal dived for the cellar. "It is nothing," she said, her voice dismissive. "Just a scratch. Even a small cut must be tended." Before she could protest, he was moving. He retrieved the kitchen's first aid kit, a battered metal box Sal kept under the prep sink. He did not ask her to sit, but his presence seemed to command it, and she found herself perching on one of the tall prep stools. He opened the box. His movements were as precise and deliberate as when he had handled his chopsticks. He took out a small antiseptic wipe and a sterile bandage. He gently took her arm, his grip incredibly light, resting her hand on his own. His thumb steadied her arm, his skin warm and dry against hers. He cleaned the wound, his touch careful, almost clinical, yet it felt more intimate than any touch she had ever known. Nora watched his hand, the hand with the thin white scar, as it worked. He was meticulously careful, his fingers avoiding her inner wrist, his gaze focused entirely on the task. It was a gesture of pure, respectful care. Nora's breath hitched, trapped in her throat. The silence in the kitchen stretched, broken only by the sharp rip of the bandage wrapper. "Why are you doing this?" "Kaito," she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The new window. Staying here. This... why?" He finished applying the bandage, his work neat and secure. He did not let go of her arm immediately. "I told you," he said, his voice low. "I owe a debt." "To whom the restaurant?" "To kindness," he said simply. "It is a rare currency." Hot, unexpected tears pricked at the corners of Nora's eyes, the stress of the night, the terror of the breaking glass, the looming threat of Matteo Valenti, and now this quiet, powerful man's defense. It all broke through her carefully constructed composure. "This is not just a restaurant," she confessed, the words spilling out, small and shaky. "It is my life. It is my mother. She is sick. Dialysis. 3 times a week at St. Jude's. The bills. They never stop. I thought if I just worked hard enough, I could keep ahead. But I am drowning. Kaido. I am drowning in debt just trying to keep her alive." She stopped, horrified at her own admission, pulling her arm back. She was complaining about money to a man who owned ships, a man who had just paid for a window that cost more than her car. Kaito watched her, his expression unreadable in the red light. He did not offer money. He did not offer solutions. He did not offer the easy, insulting comfort of pity. Instead, He stood up straight, placed his right hand flat over his own heart, and bowed his head. It was not a deep, formal bow. It was a gesture of profound acknowledgement. It was a silent promise that said, "I see your burden, I see your fight, and I will not cheapen it with words." The air in the kitchen grew thick, charged with unspoken emotion. The space between them, which he had so carefully maintained, suddenly felt electric, a vacuum pulling them together. They were standing close, drawn in by the gravity of her confession and his silent respect. The red light softened the severe lines on his face, making him look less like a billionaire and more like a man. She could feel the warmth radiating from the cooling ovens, and she could feel the heat radiating from him. She saw his chest rise and fall beneath his shirt. He watched her mouth. He did not move. He would not cross that line. He would not take. So Nora did. She took the one small step that closed the distance between them. She raised her hand, not to his face, but to his chest, where his own hand had just rested. She felt his heart, a steady, strong beat beneath her palm. It faltered, just for a beat, then sped up, hammering against her hand. His dark eyes widened slightly, asking the question she was already answering. Nora rose on her toes. She leaned in, slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, to stop her. He remained perfectly still, a statue carved from tension and control. She pressed her lips to his. It was not a desperate, frantic kiss. It was a kiss of discovery, a question and an answer in one. It was soft, slow, and profoundly gentle. His lips were firm, tasting faintly of the barley tea he favored. For a moment, he simply received it. A man starving who had forgotten the taste of bread. Then his hand came up, not to grab or to pull, but to find hers, lacing their fingers together. His other hand rested lightly on her waist, a whisper of a touch, a guide, not a demand. He angled his head, deepening the kiss by millimeters, a slow, mutual exploration. Nora's free hand found his shoulder, holding on as a wave of sensation relief, a terrifying spike of fear, and a powerful, undeniable yearning washed over her. She shifted, and her back pressed against the cold, stainless steel door of the industrial refrigerator. The shock of the cold metal through her thin uniform shirt made her gasp against his mouth, goosebumps rising on her skin. The contrast, the biting cold steel at her back and the impossible, melting warmth of his mouth was dizzying. He pulled back only an inch. His forehead rested against hers. Their breath mingled, clouding in the cool air of the kitchen. His eyes were dark, searching hers in the dim red light. "Itsudemo tomerareru," he whispered, his voice rougher than she had ever heard it. "You can stop at any time." Nora smiled, a true, shaky smile that made her cheeks ache. Her heart felt too big for her chest. "Watashi wa koko ni iru koto o erande imasu." I am choosing to stay. A long, shuddering sigh escaped him. He closed his eyes as if in prayer or relief. He did not kiss her again. Instead, he gathered her into an embrace. It was not a possessive, crushing hold. It was a shelter, gay. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her securely, his chin resting on the top of her head. Nora pressed her face into the fabric of his trench coat, inhaling the scent of him clean, like old books and the faint, metallic smell of the ocean. They stood like that for a long, timeless moment, two quiet heartbeats in the red-lit kitchen, finally synchronized. The world outside, the threats, the glass, the debt, it all faded. There was only this. Kaito's hand moved from her back to her head, his fingers gently, almost reverently, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It was a gesture more intimate than the kiss, a small act of incredible, disarming tenderness. The spell was shattered by the sound of metal hitting metal. The kitchen door flew open, banging against the steel prep table with a deafening crash. Haru Okabe stood in the doorway, his usual placid composure completely gone. His face was grim, his eyes urgent. He was breathing hard. Mizuhara-sama, Haru said, his voice sharp, pulling them apart. Nora and Kaido sprang away from each other, the electricity between them instantly replaced by a jolt of pure adrenaline. "Nani ga?" Kaito demanded, his voice dropping back into the low tones of command. Haru's gaze flickered to Nora, then back to Kaido. He spoke in Japanese, fast and clipped. "Valenti, they are here. They have surrounded the back alley and the front parking lot. Every exit is covered." Nora did not need a translation. She saw the answer in the sudden, hard set of Kaido's jaw. He looked at Nora. The tenderness was gone, replaced by the protective, dangerous focus of a man cornered. They stared at each other for 1 second longer, an entire conversation passing between them, a promise made, a battle interrupted, a war begun. The love, barely born, was already under siege. It had started as a flicker in the cold, and now, threatened by the violence outside, it did not extinguish, it blazed. The tension in the kitchen was thick enough to cut. Haru Okabe stood in the doorway, a living barrier. Kaido looked at Nora, then back at his driver. "They are not moving," Haru said in Japanese. "They are just sitting. A message." The confrontation in the parking lot never came. After a long, suffocating hour, the engines revved and the cars peeled away, leaving only the smell of exhaust and the heavy, ringing promise of violence. They retreated to the small, windowless office behind Loom's kitchen. The room was cramped, filled with invoices and boxes of wine. It felt like a bunker. The kiss, the warmth, the red light. It was a different lifetime. Now, there was only the cold reality of their situation. "You have to tell me," Nora said, her voice flat, the adrenaline having ebbed away, leaving a residue of hard resolve. "Everything. Not just the parts you think I can handle?" Kaido sat behind the manager's cheap metal desk, but he did not look like he belonged there. He looked like a displaced king. He finally nodded, the weariness on his face deepening into something ancient. "My assets are clean," he began, his voice a low monotone. "Mizuhara Maritime is a legitimate, global entity. I built it that way. I built it as a fortress." He paused, his gaze turning inward. "A fortress to protect me from my own history. My family, my father, was connected, deeply, to an organization in Yokohama, the Shirakawa Kai." Nora held her breath, recognizing the name she had only guessed at before. "I left that life," Kaido continued, his voice devoid of self-pity. "I spent 30 years building a wall of clean money and legitimate power between me and them. But the old guard is dying. A new, reckless faction wants to expand. They want my routes. They want my clean, fast ships to move their unclean product into America. They want me to open the door for them." He looked at Nora, his eyes sharp. "They have been squeezing me for months, using the MIC to tie up my ships in port, just as I showed you, but it was not working. I was too patient. So they hired a local contractor, a blunt instrument." "Valenti," Nora said. It was not a question. "Matteo Valenti is a dog on their leash. They pointed him at my operations, but they did not expect you. They did not expect Luma. They did not expect me to find a reason to push back so hard in a small New Jersey restaurant." A silence settled. The game board was laid bare. It was infinitely larger and more dangerous than she had imagined. Nora, surprisingly, was the first to speak. Her mind, so used to calculating tips and managing disasters, began to move. "So Valenti is just a pawn, but he is their only move, here, on the ground. What if we make him react? What if we make him make a mistake?" Kaido looked at her, intrigued. "The window," Nora said, her voice gaining strength. "That window is a statement. He broke it. You replaced it. He thinks he has you scared. Let us change the story. We leak it to the Greyhaven Gazette. Loom restaurant, victim of vandalism, receives stunning, anonymous donation to rebuild. We make it public. We make it about a community benefactor, not a victim." A slow smile spread across Kaido's face. It was the smile of a go master seeing his student place a clever stone. "You are creating a crack," he said, understanding instantly. "Valenti cannot stand being ignored. He cannot let someone else look like the powerful one. He will be forced to respond, and he will respond badly." The next day, Nora took a call on her break. The voice was female, professional, and cold. "Nora Calloway. My name is Lark Monroe. I am with the Federal Organized Crime Bureau. We need to talk. Not on the phone. The park across from St. Jude's. 20 minutes. The line clicked. Nora's blood ran cold. St. Jude's, where her mother was, right now, hooked to a dialysis machine. Monroe was sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons. She looked like a tired government clerk, but her eyes were like chips of ice. "We know about the Valenti crew," Monroe said, not bothering with introductions. "We know about the meeting at Pier 7 tomorrow night. We know Valenti invited your boss." "He's not my boss," Nora said. "Whatever he is," Monroe said, unimpressed. "Valenti is sloppy. We want him, but we need a witness inside that meeting. We need more than just Valenti. We need his connections." "You want Kaito to wear a wire," Nora said, disgusted. "No," Monroe said, turning her sharp gaze on Nora. "We want you. Valenti is not expecting a waitress. You can get closer. You can be our ears." "And what do I get besides killed?" "You get your mother's medical bills paid," Monroe said, her voice flat, "anonymously for the next 5 years, and we put a quiet, round-the-clock protective detail on her floor at the hospital. You cooperate, and your mother is safe from everything." The hook was set. That evening, Nora met Monroe again in a dark alley. She was handed a device, not a wire, but a high-fidelity digital recorder, disguised as a slim, elegant menu folder. "Just put it on the table. Turn it on. That is all. We will have teams in place." Nora's hand was shaking so violently she could barely take it, but her eyes were firm. She nodded once, took the folder, and walked away. The meeting was at Pier 7, in a cavernous cold storage warehouse. The air was frigid, smelling of ozone and frozen fish. Matteo Valenti sat on a crate, flanked by 2 of his men, eating a bag of nuts. Kaito entered alone, Haru waiting by the car. Nora was with him, carrying the menu folder and a tray with a single, expensive bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, playing the part of the deferential assistant. "So," Matteo said, his voice echoing in the cold, "the big boss comes to talk. I am flattered." "Let us be clear," Kaito said, his voice calm, his breath pluming. "You are an inconvenience. My ship needs to sail. Name your price. I will pay the port fees, and you and your men will disappear from my manifests." Matteo laughed, a loud, obnoxious sound. He hopped off the crate. He walked past Kaito, his eyes landing on Nora. She had placed the tray on a nearby drum, the recorder active. "Price," Matteo said, still staring at Nora. "I'm not a toll booth operator. Old man, I'm a partner, and my partners, they show respect." He reached out and stroked a finger down the sleeve of Nora's jacket. Nora recoiled, her skin crawling. "You want your ships to sail?" Matteo grinned. "Easy. I want a gift, a gesture of good faith." He pointed at Nora. "Leave her with me for the night as collateral, and tomorrow all your problems sail away." Nora's heart stopped. The air in the warehouse seemed to freeze solid. Kaito did not move. He did not yell. He did not even look at Matteo. He looked at Nora, his face a mask of iron control. But in his eyes, Nora saw something she had not seen before. A line, invisible and absolute, had been crossed. A fire, cold and black, was now burning there. "The negotiation is over," Kaito said, his voice perfectly level. He turned, his faded coat swirling, and walked out of the warehouse. Nora, grabbing the tray and the folder, scrambled after him, her heart hammering. Back in the sedan, Haru pulled away from the curb without a word. Nora's hands were shaking so hard she could barely press the stop button on the recorder. He is insane," she whispered. "He is a fool," Kaido said, his voice tight with a controlled, lethal rage. He has just declared a war he cannot possibly win. Later that night, alone in her small apartment, Nora plugged headphones into the recorder. She had to hear it to prove to herself it was real. She heard the echo of the warehouse. She heard Kaido's cold voice. She heard Mateo's disgusting laugh. And then she heard something else. A third voice, one that had not been in the room but had been on the phone with Mateo just before they arrived. It was tiny, but unmistakable. A man, complaining. "Cannot keep Mizuhara's ships docked forever. Mateo, it is costing me political capital. You handle this, or the protection fee goes up." And then, Mateo had replied, "Do not worry, Commissioner, I will handle him. I will get you a new gift." "Commissioner," Nora replayed it, her blood turning to ice. She recognized the voice. It was Commissioner Davies, the head of the Metropolitan Integrity Commission, the man who was on television every week talking about cleaning up Greyhaven. She called Monroe. An hour later, Monroe was at her door, her face grim. She listened to the tape, her expression tightening. "Commissioner Davies." "My God," she looked at Nora. "This changes everything. You are not just a witness to extortion anymore. You are a witness to high-level political corruption. They will not send thugs to scare you. Nora, they will send professionals to erase you." Monroe's voice softened. "Just a fraction. The CIT has a program, a safe house, far from here. We can get you on a plane, tonight. New name, new life. We can get your mother transferred to a new facility, just as secure." Nora looked at the recorder, then at the picture of her mother on the wall. She thought of Loom, shattered and rebuilt. She thought of Kaido and the cold fire in his eyes. She shook her head. "No, I'm not running." She looked at Monroe, her gaze steady. "This is my home. He is my friend. I'm not running." Kaito, sitting in his own dark car outside her building, watched Monroe leave. He had a tracker on the FOCB agent's car. He knew what she would offer. He saw Nora's light stay on, a small square of yellow in the dark. He realized, with a deep, aching clarity, that his love for her had made her a target. His desire to protect her had painted a bullseye on her back. He made a call. "Haru," he said, his voice like cold steel. "The defensive strategy is over. It is time to pull the spotlight. Find me every piece of leverage we have on Commissioner Davies, and find me the weakness in the Shirakawa Kai's new leadership. I am done waiting for them to play their hand. I am taking the game to them." He would save her, not as a clean billionaire, but as the man he had spent 30 years trying to forget. Kaito Mizuhara did not fight with fists. He fought with light. 2 days after the failed negotiation, Loom was not just repaired, it was reborn. Kaito had spent a fortune. He announced a Greyhaven peace dinner, a publicity stunt of breathtaking audacity. He invited New York's most celebrated chefs, food critics from every major paper, and the local news stations, who, smelling a story of corporate money and local grit, came in droves. The restaurant was blindingly bright, lit for television cameras. The new front window was a single, flawless sheet of glass. Matteo Valenti had to come. To refuse the invitation, sent publicly to celebrate Greyhaven's resilience, would be an admission of weakness, an acknowledgement that he was the reason it needed to be resilient in the first place. Loom's open kitchen was transformed into a stage. Kaito, in a crisp white chef's jacket that looked surprisingly natural on him, stood at the center, a $150,000 sharkskin Oroshigane and a row of gleaming knives laid out before him. Nora, in a simple, elegant black dress, stood beside him. She was the translator, the host, the voice of the evening. They moved together like a seasoned pair, a dance practiced for years. Kaito-san welcomes his friend, Chef Antoine, and thanks him for bringing his light to Greyhaven. Nora announced, her voice clear and steady, amplified by a small microphone. Kaito would bow, then turn to a block of pristine, bluefin toro. "The first dish," Nora continued, switching seamlessly between Japanese and English, "represents clarity. It is sliced. With intention." Kaito's hands moved. The blade was a silver blur. He was not just cutting sashimi, he was dissecting an opponent, each slice thin as paper, perfect as a razor's edge. They were a team, bound by the lights, the danger, and the unspoken promise that had passed between them in the kitchen. Matteo Valenti arrived late, flanked by two of his largest bodyguards. He wore an expensive suit, his hair slicked back. He was smiling, but his eyes were reptilian, scanning the room, the cameras, the exits. He saw Nora, and his smile became a possessive, ugly sneer. Nora felt his gaze like a physical weight. Her hand instinctively went to her hair, where a simple, elegant silver hair clip was nestled above her ear. The recorder, a tiny high-tech piece of FOCB equipment, was live. Across the street, on the roof, Agent Monroe watched through a sniper's spotter scope, her own team in place. "He is in," she whispered into her mic. "The asset is active." The dinner was a resounding success. The food was art. The wine flowed. Kaito was a gracious, silent host, while Nora was his eloquent, charming voice. Matteo sat at the main table, trapped, forced to eat and smile for the cameras, his rage simmering just beneath the surface. Finally, the dessert course was served, a delicate green tea mousse. As Nora placed the small, beautiful dish in front of Kaito, who sat at the head of the table for the final toast, their hands met beneath the tablecloth. It was a small, fleeting contact. Nora's fingers brushed the back of Kaito's hand. He did not flinch. He turned his hand slightly, his thumb grazing her knuckles, a current of pure, steady calm passing from him to her. It was a silent, desperate question. "Are you all right?" And a resolute answer, "I am with you." They looked at each other, a long, deep look that sealed their pact in the center of the crowded, dangerous room. Matteo, watching them, saw the look. His patience snapped. He leaned forward, his voice a low growl that cut through the polite chatter. "Enough of this!" he hissed, just for Kaito and Nora to hear. "The food is great. The show is over. You think these lights make you safe? You pay. Old man, you pay me. Right now, the full protection fee, or the next window I break is her." His eyes were on Nora. Kaito Mizuhara smiled. It was a thin, cold, terrible smile. "Mr. Valenti," he said, his voice quiet but carrying, "your fee is the public spotlight." Right on cue, a reporter from the Greyhaven Gazette, who had been tipped off by Haru, leaned in with his camera. "Mr. Valenti, is it true you are Loom's local partner?" Flash. The camera bulb popped, illuminating Matteo's face, contorted in a mask of pure, undisguised rage. The threat, the extortion was suddenly, publicly, exposed. Matteo's hand dove under the table. It came up, not with money, but with the dull, black steel of a snub-nosed revolver, kept hidden beneath a napkin. He was aiming at Kaito, but Haru Okabe, standing by the main fire alarm, had been waiting for this. His hand, wrapped in a cloth, smashed the glass of the alarm box. The whoop, whoop, whoop of the alarm was deafening, but it was nothing compared to the sound that came next, the hiss and click of the ceiling-mounted fire suppression system. A deluge of cold water rained down. The room exploded into chaos. Women screamed as the icy water hit them. Men shouted, their expensive suits ruined. Camera lights shorted out in showers of sparks. The perfect dinner turned into a dark, frantic, soaking nightmare. Matteo's gun was lost in the panic. He roared, trying to push through the stampeding guests. Nora, her training kicking in, ducked behind the solid oak bar. She was safe for a moment, but trapped. A hand grabbed her arm. It was Kaito. He was drenched, his silver hair plastered to his head, but his eyes were on fire. "This way," he commanded. He pulled her not toward an exit, but back, through the kitchen, and into the dry storage pantry. He slammed the door, plunging them into near darkness, the only sound the muffled screams outside and the violent, frantic hammering of their own hearts. They were soaked, their clothes clinging to them, water dripping from their hair, forming puddles at their feet. In the dim light, Nora could see a fine white dusting in his dark hair. A bag of flour, stored on a high shelf, had been hit by a stray water jet and had burst, covering the top of the room in a fine, white powder. They stared at each other, breathing hard, the adrenaline a poison and a drug. "He tried to kill you," Nora whispered, her voice shaking. "He tried to take you," Kaito replied, his voice rough. He cupped her face, his hands, still warm, against her cold, wet skin. This was not the gentle, respectful man from the kitchen. This was the man who had faced down Matteo Valenti. He did not kiss her. He consumed her. It was a kiss born of terror and defiance, a desperate, claiming act. It was all teeth and breath and the cold taste of sprinkler water. It was not polite. It was not respectful. It was necessary. His lips were hard, demanding, and she met him with the same ferocious, pent-up energy, her hands gripping his sodden jacket, pulling him closer. Flour dislodged from the shelves, drifted down around them, clinging to their wet hair like snow. His hands slid from her face, down her neck, his thumbs tracing the line of her collarbone, and then wrapped around her back, pulling her flush against him. He held her there, securely, a shield against the world. His touch was desperate, but it never crossed the line into disrespect. It was a promise, not a demand. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers, their breath ragged. "After tonight, he panted, his voice a low, gravelly promise. "I will not let them touch you, ever again." Nora, her heart hammering, looked up at him, her eyes fierce in the dark. She placed her trembling hand on his chest. "We fight," she said. "We fight, together." A new sound cut through the chaos sirens. Close, too close. But it was the wrong siren. Not the FOCB, not the Greyhaven PD. It was the high-low wail of the Metropolitan Integrity Commission. The men who were on Valenti's payroll, the allies were arriving to dismantle the scene, to confiscate the cameras, to control the narrative. "We have to go," Kaito said, his voice urgent. He knew the building's layout. He grabbed her hand and pulled her to a small, metal-plated back door used for flower deliveries. They burst out into the back alley, into the cold, clean rain. A dark sedan slid to a stop. Agent Monroe was at the wheel. "The evidence!" she yelled over the sirens. Nora's hands fumbled with the clip in her hair, her fingers numb and wet. She ripped it free. "Here." She tossed the small, silver device through the open window. Monroe caught it, her face grim. "Go, now." The sedan sped away, carrying the only proof they had. Nora and Kaito were alone in the alley, soaked, covered in flour, and hunted. The sirens of their enemies were rounding the corner. Hand in hand, they ran into the labyrinth of the dark city. They ran for miles, finally taking refuge in a small, anonymous motel off the interstate, paying in cash from the emergency roll Kaito kept in his shoe. The room smelled of bleach and old cigarettes. The chaos of the peace dinner had ripped the story open. By morning, the city was electric with rumors, but they were not the ones Kaito had expected. The narrative, twisted by a sudden, coordinated media leak, was not about Valenti's extortion. It was about Kaito. The Greyhaven Gazette, citing anonymous civic integrity sources, ran a bombshell headline, "Billionaire Benefactor or Yokohama Kingpin." The article painted Kaito not as a victim, but as an invader. It claimed Mizuhara was not just a name, but a title, that he was the Taisho, the supreme elder of the Shirakawa Kai, returned to America not as a businessman, but as a conqueror, attempting to muscle out the local Valenti family to establish a new black route for illicit trade. Nora stood in the cramped motel room, the television blaring a similar, sensationalized report. She saw her own face, a still from the restaurant, labeled known associate. She turned to Kaito, who was standing by the window, staring at the rain-slicked parking lot, his back to her. He looked exhausted. The fight from the night before drained out of him, leaving only a bone-deep weariness. She clicked the television off, plunging the room into silence. "They are calling you a monster," Nora said quietly. Kaito's shoulders tensed. "I need to know," she continued, her voice not accusing but steady, searching. "Not what the news says, not what Valenti says, what you say, what you were. It does not matter to me as much as who you are choosing to be, right now, in this room." Kaito turned, his face a mask of old pain. "What I am," he said, his voice heavy, "is a man who ran from his father's name for 40 years. Yes, my family was part of the Shirokawa Kai. It was a shadow that followed me my entire life." He sat on the edge of the stiff motel bed. "But I did not just run. 20 years ago, a violent faction, the one that now hunts me, tried to seize control. They wanted to move into human trafficking, into chemical trade. They wanted blood." He looked at his hands, the scarred one and the clean one. "I used my new power, my clean money, to stop them. I did not send assassins. I launched a corporate raid. I bought their shell companies. I exposed their smuggling routes to their rivals. I bled them dry without spilling a single drop of blood. I forced them to the table, and I made them dissolve. I disarmed an army with a balance sheet." He met her gaze, and I swore an oath, Nora, on my father's grave, that my hands would remain clean of that life and of that blood forever. I have kept that oath. Nora looked at him for a long, quiet moment. She saw no lie. She saw a man trapped by a past he had defeated but could not escape. She walked over and sat next to him, her knee brushing his. She believed him. "I believe you," she said, "but love is not enough to win this." She pulled out her phone and a small, secondary burner phone Monroe had given her. "I have the tape from Pier 7, the one that proves Mateo was working for Commissioner Davies." She made the call. She met Monroe in the back of a laundromat, passed over a USB drive containing the audio file, and pointed Monroe to the exact timestamp. "Commissioner Davies, that is your leak. That is the real story." Monroe looked at the drive like it was a grenade. This is everything. But the MIC, with its network of corrupt city officials, moved faster than the FOCB. The counterattack was not aimed at Kaito, who was now a shadowy public figure. It was aimed at Nora. Within hours, a new story broke. A doctored bank statement leaked to a hungry press showed a transfer of $50,000 into Nora's personal account from an offshore shell company. A company that, reporters quickly discovered, was a subsidiary of Mizuhara Maritime Holdings. The narrative flipped instantly. Nora was not a victim. She was a paid accomplice, a mall, a honey trap. The press descended, not on Loom, which was now a boarded-up crime scene, but on Nora's apartment building and, far worse, on St. Jude's Hospital. Then, the calls to her mother's hospital room began. Quiet. Gravelly voices. "Tell your daughter to be careful. Shame what can happen in a dialysis clinic. Easy for a wire to get crossed." Nora, still in the motel, received a frantic, weeping call from her mother. Kaito took the phone from her shaking hand. His face, which had been weary, turned to granite. He made a call, not to Haru, not to his lawyers. He called Agent Monroe. "You let this happen," he said, his voice a low, lethal hiss. "You have the evidence, but you let them attack her family. Fix it. You have a counterpart at the Coastline Intelligence Task Force. They have a secure, high-rise safe house in this city, one the MIC does not know about. I want Mrs. Calloway in it. Now, you will move her, and my private team will shadow yours. This is not negotiable." Nora watched him, not as a lover, but as a force. He was on the phone for an hour, meticulously planning an armored car-level extraction for a sick woman. He demanded lists of the nurses, the transport route, the access codes. He was not just protecting her mother, he was taking control of the entire operation. Her heart, already his, anchored itself another notch deeper. The next day, with her mother secure in an anonymous, guarded apartment, the final blow fell. Matteo Valenti, feeling the walls close in from the FOCB, the MIC, and Kaido's unknown resources, played his last card. Haru Okabe, on a supply run, disappeared. Kaido's phone rang. It was Matteo. "Your man is safe," he snarled, the bravado back in his voice. "For now. You want him back in one piece. You bring me what you would not give me at the pier. You bring me the real books, the black book for the port, your private shipping ledgers, the ones that show all the names, all the routes, the ones the Shirakawa Kai want." He named the location the abandoned Bayside container yard. "Midnight, you come alone, old man. You bring the book, or your driver learns how to swim without his feet." The line went dead. Kaido stood, his face ashen. Haru was not just an employee. He was the son of his oldest friend. "I'm going with you," Nora said. "No," Kaido said, his voice absolute. "This is not a negotiation. It is a trap. He wants the ledger, but he also wants me. He will kill us both." "And that is why I am going," Nora said, ragged, stepping in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "He's not expecting me. He thinks I'm a waitress, a mall you paid off. He still underestimates me. That is our only advantage. I am not the woman you met at Lumi. Kaido, I am not asking. We fight together. You said it yourself." He stared at her, seeing the iron in her spine, the absolute lack of fear in her eyes. He saw, finally, that she was right. "It is a trap," he said again, his voice softer. "He will have men, and the MIC will be watching, ready to clean up." He nodded. "Once, a decision was made. We will need a signal, a phrase, in Japanese, that only we will understand if I am captured, if I am forced to speak. I will need you to give the signal for Monroe's team to move in, not before." "What is the signal?" Nora asked. "The first words you ever spoke to me," he said. "When they have me, they will try to use me as a shield. I will shout to you, I will ask you, 'What did you say to me that night?' And you will answer, loud and clear, 'Konbanwa.' You will say, 'Anata wa genki desu ka?'" He gripped her arms. "That is the signal. That is when the FOCB moves, not a second before." They drove to the container yard in a stolen, untraceable car Haru had stashed for emergencies. Nora looked at her reflection in the cracked passenger side mirror, the rain streaking her face like tears. She did not see a waitress. She did not see a victim. She saw the woman Kaido saw a partner, a fighter, a woman carrying the weight of a restaurant, a city, and the life of a man who had finally, in the dark, found his own reason to be brave. The Bayside container yard was a graveyard of steel, a maze of massive, rusting boxes stacked high against the foggy night sky. The only light came from a few high-mast sodium lamps that cast a sickly, orange glow over the wet asphalt. Kaido walked alone into the center of the yard, carrying a heavy, leather-bound ledger. He was a small, solitary figure in his faded coat, seemingly swallowed by the industrial giants. 200 yards away, hidden behind a stack of blue containers marked Haneda, Nora watched through a pair of night vision binoculars. She was dressed in a dark, oversized dockworker's jumpsuit, a knit cap pulled low over her hair. A tiny, flesh-colored earpiece was her only connection to the outside world. "He is approaching the center," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I count 5? No, 6. Valenti is there, and... oh God, Haru." "We see him. Nora?" Agent Monroe's voice was a flat, tinny whisper in her ear. "Stay in position. The CIT team is standing by to receive the data from the ledger. Do not move until the signal." Matteo Valenti was sitting on the hood of a black SUV, lit by its headlights. Haru Okabe was on his knees in the gravel, his hands bound, his face bruised, but his posture defiant. A thick-necked Valenti guard held a gun to his head. "Right on time, old man," Matteo called out, his voice unnervingly cheerful. "You brought my book." Kaiti Ito stopped, placing the ledger on a wooden pallet 20 feet away from Matteo. "Let Haru go. He's of no use to you." "Oh, he's of great use," Matteo said, laughing. He gestured to the guard, who shoved Haru forward, forcing him to stumble. "He is my insurance." He nodded at the book. "That is my insurance, too." He sent one of his men to retrieve the ledger. The man opened it, his eyes scanning the pages. "It looks real. Boss, names, dates, shipping routes." "Of course it is," Matteo sneered. He pulled out a small, portable scanner. "And now, I make a copy for my new partners." As he began scanning the first page, he was unknowingly activating a hidden, high-speed data transmitter embedded in the book's spine. In a mobile van parked 3 miles away, a CIT technician's screen lit up. "We have the stream," he said. "It is live. He's scanning the bait." "Wait for the signal. Nora," Monroe commanded in her ear. Matteo smiled, pocketing his scanner. "It has been a pleasure, Kaido, but you have been a real pain in my ass." He nodded to a dark recess loading bay Nora had not seen. The bay doors rumbled open, revealing a large, unmarked panel truck. "And I have one more piece of business. I hear a little bird in my ear that you have a girlfriend, a little waitress I was supposed to meet." He snapped his fingers. "Find her! She is here! I can feel it!" 2 of his men, splitting off, began to move toward the shadows, flashlights cutting the dark. They were coming right for her. "Monroe, they are coming!" Nora hissed, panic rising in her throat. "He knew! He was trapping me, too!" "Kaido!" she screamed, her voice raw. Matteo's head snapped up. "That is the voice, the one from the negotiation. Get her." It was not the signal, it was a mistake. But Kaido, hearing the pure terror in her voice, changed the plan. He looked directly at the container where she was hiding and shouted, his voice a commanding roar that echoed off the steel. "Nora watashi ni nani o imashita ka? Nora, what did you say to me?" Nora's mind went blank. The signal. It was not the right time, but it was the only time they had. She took a deep breath, stood up from her cover and shouted the words into the night, her voice clear and strong. "Konbanwa, anata wa genki desu ka?" "Now, Monroe, now." She screamed into the earpiece. The effect was instantaneous. Every high-mast lamp in the container yard, every headlight on Valenti's cars, every flashlight, everything died. The world plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. For a second, there was only the sound of the wind. Then, chaos. A flashlight beam clicked on near Nora, and she saw one of Valenti's men, momentarily blind, fumbling with his light. Before he could turn, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness, Kaido. He moved not like an old man, but like water. He did not punch. He used the man's own momentum, a turn of the wrist, a strike to the throat, a redirected force. The man crumpled without a sound. Kaido took the man's gun from his holster. Nora, adrenaline surging, ran to Haru. Her hands, shaking violently, fumbled with the knife she had strapped to her ankle. She began sewing at Haru's zip-tie restraints. "I cannot! It is too dark!" A hand, warm and steady, covered hers. Kaido. He was right behind her. He squeezed her hand. Once. A silent transfer of strength and calm. His own. Steady hands guided the blade, and the ties snapped. "Go," he whispered. "The book," Nora panted. "The data—" "The data is not in the book," Kaito said. At that exact moment, 2 miles away in downtown Greyhaven, the massive digital billboard in the public square, which usually showed sports scores, lit up. It was not sports. It was a live, cascading feed of Commissioner Davies's private bank accounts, routing numbers, and offshore holdings, all sourced from the bait ledger. The CIT was not just gathering evidence, they were making the entire city a witness. The MIC arriving on the scene to rescue Valenti and confiscate the evidence was suddenly exposed. Sirens wailed in the distance, but in the yard, the fight was not over. A spotlight, high and bright, suddenly snapped on. It was not from the yard's power. It was a battery-powered light on Matteo's SUV. He stood in the beam, looking feral, his plan collapsing. And he had Nora, grabbed from the darkness, his arm locked around her throat, the cold muzzle of his revolver pressed hard against her temple. "Nobody moves," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Kaido, you rat, you set me up." Kaido, standing 20 feet away, slowly raised the gun he had taken. He was in the spotlight, exposed. "Let her go, Mateo," Kaito said, his voice cold. "Drop the gun!" Mateo screamed, pulling Nora tighter. "Drop it, or I swear to God I will paint the pavement with her." Kaito looked at Nora. Her face was pale, but her eyes were not scared. They were furious. He held her gaze. He slowly, deliberately, lowered the gun he was holding and let it clatter to the wet ground. He kicked it away. He began to walk forward, his hands empty, his palms out. "You wanted my book, Mateo," Kaito said, his voice suddenly soft, almost conversational. He was speaking English, but his words were laced with Japanese phrasing. "You wanted my routes, but you do not understand the giri, the debt. You do not understand what a man owes." Mateo was confused, his gun hand wavering a fraction of an inch. What are you talking about?" "A man who loves," Kaito said, taking another step, "owes a debt that cannot be paid in money or in blood. He owes his life." It was the 1-second distraction Nora needed. She did not wait to be rescued. She drove her elbow back, hard, into Mateo's solar plexus. He grunted, the air exploding from his lungs, his arms spasming, the gun firing a single, deafening shot straight into the air. In that instant, Kaito lunged. He was not aiming for Mateo. He was aiming for her. He grabbed Nora's waist, pulling her away from the flailing gangster. Using his own body as a shield, they crashed backward, tumbling over a stack of heavy burlap sacks, out of the spotlight and into the safety of the shadows. At the same time, a deafening boom ripped through the yard, a flash of orange and white from the other side of the maze. Haru, now free, had detonated a small-yield concussion charge on a container lock, a planned diversion. The remaining Valenti guards, disoriented by the dark, the data stream, and now the explosion, broke and ran, scattering into the maze. The sirens were closer now, FOCB, Monroe. But Mateo was gone. In the blast's confusion, he and a single shadowy figure in a suit Commissioner Davies had slipped into an MIC cruiser and sped away. Kaito pulled Nora to her feet. Rain began to fall, cold and hard. They ran. Haru at their side, not looking back, they burst through a rusted gate and found themselves on the muddy bank of the Nightingale River. They stopped, gasping for air, their hands still locked together, sweat and rain and mud covering them. They were alive. They were free. But as they looked across the dark, churning water at the lights of the corrupt city, they knew, with a shared, exhausted certainty, it was not over. They found refuge in a place Haru had kept hidden for years, a small, unfinished loft above a defunct ironworks on Foundry Street. It was a single, vast room, cold and echoing, smelling of rust and old oil. The only furniture was a mattress on the floor, a single chair, and a table. A row of industrial windows looked out over the glittering, indifferent city. But it was safe, for now. Rain, hard and driving, hammered a relentless rhythm on the tin roof. A single bare bulb hanging from a long cord cast a circle of light so yellow and thick it looked like honey. Kaito sat in the chair, his jacket and shirt removed. The brawl at the container yard had not left him unscathed. A massive, dark bruise was spreading across his ribs, a purple-black flower blooming on his skin. Nora knelt before him, tending to the wound with a cheap first aid kit she had bought at an all-night bodega. She was gentle, her fingers, still smudged with axle grease from the yard, cleaning the scrape with an antiseptic wipe. "He hit you with the butt of the gun," she said, her voice a low murmur, barely audible over the storm. "He was aiming for my head," Kaito replied, his voice rough. He winced as the alcohol stung his skin. "You should have let me take the hit," she said. "Never," he said, the word final. She finished cleaning the wound and looked up. The honey-colored light caught the silver in his hair and the exhaustion in his eyes. "What happens after this, Kaido?" she asked, her voice small. When? We are done. What happens?" He was quiet for a long time, listening to the rain. "I have a house," he said. "On a small, rocky coast in Yokohama. You can see the ocean, but you cannot see the port. It is quiet." "Sounds lonely," she whispered. "It has been," he admitted. He looked at her, his gaze holding hers. "I have thought about a small place, here, by the docks, a diner, not a restaurant like Loom, a place that serves hot tea, miso soup." A small, watery smile touched Nora's lips. "And I could teach that Japanese I only half remember, for the immigrants at the port, free classes." "A kitchen of light," Kaido said, using his own phrase from before, "a school of words." They were small dreams, impossible dreams, but they hung in the cold, dusty air, burning and bright. The rain on the roof seemed to beat in time with their shared, fragile hope. Nora stood, her decision made. The air was cold, and his shirt was still damp from the rain and sweat. She picked up his wet trench coat. Heavy and cold, she did not ask. She simply began to take it from him, a gesture of profound, domestic care. Kaido, stiff from his injuries, let her. He stood up, and she began to unbutton his damp shirt, the one he had been wearing under the jacket. Her fingers brushed the skin of his chest. He placed his hands on her shoulders. It was a heavy, slow gesture. He did not pull her closer. He did not push her away. He simply held her, his thumbs resting on her collarbones, his eyes asking the question his voice would not. "Are you sure this is not a game? This is not a rescue?" Nora looked into his eyes, her own clear and steady. She leaned in, just a fraction, and nodded. Once. He did not pull her. He met her halfway. The kiss from the flower pantry had been a desperate spark in the dark. This was a slow, deliberate fire. It was a kiss that held all the fear, all the pain, all the relief of the past week. It deepened, his hands sliding from her shoulders to her back, her own hands coming up to frame his face, her fingers tracing the scar on his hand, then the lines of his jaw. The rhythm built. A slow, aching hunger, then slowed again, becoming a conversation of touch and breath. His hands were respectful, firm, landing only on the small of her back, her waist, her shoulders, places that invited his touch. He murmured something in Japanese, a low, rough word of thanks. "Thank you," she whispered back in English. She could feel his heart hammering against her own, a wild, trapped bird. She broke the kiss and pressed her palm flat against his chest, just to feel it, to anchor herself to the steady, living beat of him. His skin was hot. "Nora," he breathed, his voice a raw plea. She led him to the mattress on the floor, her hand in his. The light from the single bulb was kind, painting them in gold and shadow. The rain on the roof was a drum, a rhythm for the world they were building and the world they were shutting out. There was the sound of a choked laugh, a whisper. The bare bulb cast the silhouette of a curved back, of hands tangled in silver hair, and then a thick, woolen blanket pulled from the end of the mattress was drawn up, covering them both, leaving only the sound of the rain and their mingled, steady breathing in the warm, safe dark. Later, they lay side by side, the blanket drawn up to their chins, their bodies finally at peace. The storm outside had lessened to a steady, soft patter. Nora found a pencil on the floor, left by a workman years ago. She took Kaido's hand, the one with the scar, and, in the dim light, she wrote on his palm, the graphite like a whisper against his skin. "We live, not just exist." He closed his hand, capturing the words. A harsh, electronic buzzing ripped the piece apart. It was Nora's burner phone, vibrating on the wooden table. They both sat up, the blanket falling, the cold air hitting their skin. The world had returned. Nora grabbed the phone. "Monroe." "We got it." Monroe's voice was sharp, all business. "The data stream." "My God, Nora, it is not just Davies. It is a network. A federal judge has just signed the warrants. Secret court. We are moving, and we are moving now. But there is a problem." "What problem?" Nora said, pulling on her shirt, her voice already cold. "The warrants are for the MIC. They are based on financial data. It is strong, but they will call it circumstantial. The DA says the case will collapse without a living witness to the conspiracy." "A witness," Kaito said, already pulling on his own clothes. "Mateo," Monroe said, "we do not just need the money, we need the muscle. We need Valenti to flip on Davies, to connect the money to the violence. He is the last piece. We need him. Alive." "Where is he?" Nora asked. "He just surfaced." Monroe said, "He's making a final play. He's not running. He's cornered, and he is going public." Nora and Kaito were already dressed. They stood in the center of the cold room, the safe harbor, now a memory. They turned to each other. They did not kiss. They did not need to. They shared a long, final embrace, a soldier's hug, back to the world, facing each other. "Together," he said. "Together," she replied. They descended the cold, rattling steel grate stairs, leaving the warm loft behind. They stepped out onto the wet, empty cobblestones of Foundry Street, the smell of the river heavy in the air. As they hit the sidewalk, a set of headlights flashed on, then another and another. A line of 5 black sedans, silent and unmarked, blocked the end of the street. They were trapped. The final bell had just been rung. The 5 sedans were not Mateo's. They were not the MIC. The doors opened, and Agent Lark Monroe stepped out, flanked by a dozen heavily armed FOCB and CIT tactical officers. "He's at the dock square," Monroe said, her voice urgent. "No time for pleasantries. He's broadcasting, live streaming from his phone, trying to spin the narrative, painting himself as the victim of a foreign takeover. He's trying to start a riot." The Greyhaven Dock Square was a wide cobblestone plaza, dominated by the massive dark screen of the city's public information board. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the sirens and the bizarre, chaotic live stream. Matteo Valenti stood on the central fountain, his face wild, his phone held up like a torch. "I am the victim!" he screamed to the crowd and his phone. This Taisho, he comes here. He tries to take our city, our port, and the feds, they are with him." Behind him, on the steps of the Port Authority building, stood Commissioner Davies and a wall of silent, uniformed MIC officers. They were not there to arrest Mateo. They were there as a show of force, a physical wall of integrity backing Valenti's story. "We cannot get a clean shot," Monroe whispered into her mic as they took up positions. "He's surrounded by civilians. We need to draw him out." Nora looked at Kaito. "He's using the crowd as a shield, just like he used me." She took a deep breath. "He underestimated me. He's still underestimating me." Before Kaito or Monroe could stop her, Nora Calloway broke from the FOCB line and walked into the center of the square. "Nora, no!" Monroe yelled. But Nora kept walking. The crowd parted around her, a murmur spreading. She walked until she was at the base of the fountain, looking up at the man who had tried to destroy her. "You want a witness, Mateo?" Nora's voice, amplified by a nearby news crew's microphone, rang out clear and cold. "You want to talk about victims?" Mateo's face, lit by his phone, turned from rage to confusion, then to a predatory smile. "The little waitress come to confess what he paid you." Nora turned from him and faced the crowd. She faced the cameras. "This man," she said, pointing at Valenti, "demanded protection money from my restaurant, Loom. When we refused, he smashed our windows." The crowd murmured. "This man," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "demanded a black ledger from Kaito Mizuhara, a man who did nothing but offer this city his business. He held a man hostage. He threatened my family." She then turned to the wall of silent officers. And this man, Commissioner Davies, was his partner, taking a cut of the blood money. She took a breath and switched, her voice resonating with a new power. She spoke in perfect, fluid Japanese, a message not for the crowd, but for the dark forces that had started this. She spoke of honor, of debt, and of the Shirakawa Kai, naming them, shaming them for using a coward like Valenti. The crowd was mesmerized, confused, but they were turning against Matteo. "Liar!" Matteo shrieked, his control snapping. He dropped his phone and pulled his gun, the same revolver from the restaurant. He leveled it, not at Nora, but at the man she was protecting. He aimed it directly at Kaito, who had followed her, standing exposed. "You old man!" Matteo screamed. "This all ends with you!" Kaito held up his empty hands, a target. He took a single, deliberate step forward. Nora reacted instantly. She did not scream. She did not beg. She used the only weapon she had. She called out, her voice a sharp command, using the first words she ever spoke to him, but changing one. "Kaito!" she yelled. "Hidari ni!" It was not a greeting. It was a warning. To the left. Kaito, who had been waiting for Hidari left or Miji right, did not hesitate. He was not a warrior, but he had lived among them. He moved, not dodging, but flowing, a single sharp step to his left, just as Matteo fired. Crack! The sound of the gunshot echoed across the square. The bullet hissed through the empty space where Kaito's heart had been a millisecond before. For a beat, the city held its breath. Then the world broke. A dark shape, moving with blinding speed from the side, launched itself from the shadows. Haru Okabe, his face a mask of cold fury, hit Matteo Valenti in a full-body tackle. A crack of bone as they hit the cobblestones. The gun skittered away. At the exact same instant, the massive public screen behind them, which had been dark, flashed to life. It was not a sports score. It was the CIT data feed. Commissioner Davies' name, his badge number, and the cascading, undeniable proof of the offshore accounts. Every civilian, every reporter, every cop looked up. Commissioner Davies' face went white. He turned to his men. "Stop them! Seize that screen!" But it was too late. Agent Lark Monroe, FOCB badge held high, stepped into the light, her voice amplified by a bullhorn. "Commissioner Davies, you are under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, and violation of your oath, your men. Have the right to remain silent." The MIC officers, their careers and lives flashing before their eyes, looked at the screen, then at their corrupt boss, then at the heavily armed FOCB agents. One by one, they stepped away from Davies, their alliance, bought with fear and money, dissolving like paper in the rain. Matteo Valenti, his arm broken, was hauled to his feet and cuffed by Haru, a look of utter, final disbelief on his face. It was over. Kaito Mizuhara stood, the sound of the gunshot still ringing in his ears, the adrenaline, the tension, the 40-year-old fight. It all left him at once. His knees buckled. He did not hit the ground. Nora was there. She caught him, wrapping her arms around him, her small frame taking his entire weight. He was shaking, not from fear, but from a profound, bone-deep release. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her. "We are home, Kaito," she whispered, her own voice thick with tears, as she held him. "We are home." And as they stood, locked together in the center of the square, a single, pale gold line of light broke over the dark water of the Nightingale River. The first dawn of a new Greyhaven was beginning. Loom did not just reopen, it was reborn. It was now Loom the Kitchen of Light set. Nora Calloway, co-owner, stood at the door, inside. The restaurant was packed. It was language night. At one table, a free class in beginner's Japanese was being held. At another, Spanish. Kaito Mizuhara, watching from the bar, had kept his word. His Kitchen of Light Fund was now a citywide initiative, offering legal aid and financial relief to small business owners being extorted. The FOCB, with Monroe at the helm, was systematically cleaning house, using the data from Kaito's ledger to indict over 30 officials. The CIT, impressed, had hired Nora as a paid community consultant. And Kaito himself, he had signed a historic port transparency deal, severing the last frayed threads of his family's dark past, making his business and himself truly, finally clean. The bell above the door chimed. Nora looked up. Kaito stood there, in a simple dark suit, no longer hiding in a faded coat. Nora smiled, her eyes bright. She was wearing a simple black dress, the same one from that first night. She gave a small, respectful bow. "Konbanwa," she said, her voice soft. "Ocha wa ikaga desu ka?" Kaito smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. He reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. From outside, the sound of confetti cannons and cheering the official reopening ceremony began. He bowed his head, a gesture of gratitude. "Hai, onegai shimasu." "Yes, please." Sometimes, a greeting in the right language can save a city from its fear. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am so curious to know where in the world you are listening from. Please drop a comment below and let us share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to Mafia Boss Story, give this video a like, and support us by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by many more.